I think what we'll start off briefly with is a quick introduction of about 1 or 2 minutes by each one of us. So before I hand it over, I'll just tell a little bit about myself. I've been an entrepreneur for 17 years, and I started off with a genomics and a bioinformatics company when I moved back from the US in the year 2000, and made it one of the largest genomic services companies worldwide. And one of the challenges, what I found with most of the genomic data which was there, including the database that we were selling to the large pharmaceutical companies, was the lack of information that was Indian in there. And Indians form 1/6 of the population of the world. So I said, there seems to be an inequality when it comes to looking at genomic data and looking at how we take it forward in terms of personalized medicine. So we started Map My Genome so that consumers can contribute to that data. So not only are they contributing to the data, but they are empowered with information that allows them to be able to take a simple non-invasive test that allows them to get information about themselves. So whether it's disease predisposition, whether it is drug information or anything else. So hopefully we are doing two things at the same time, but it has been an exciting journey. And I'd like to ask Ramesh, maybe if you can start off a little bit about your background.
I would like to keep this very informal. Please feel free to interrupt me or ask questions. I would welcome that. I have sort of mixed background. So I spent 30 years at Kodak. I don't know if you remember the film company. It's sort of fading away. And I have worked in Kodak in various capacities, as a scientist, a manufacturing engineer, process engineer, supply chain logistics guy, open innovation person, and technology scout, and so on. In a simple nutshell, what the way I would describe myself is that I like to work with abstract concepts, pull global teams together, and deliver technologies and products in a very short time frame. I've done that for over 25 years. I've been doing innovation and entrepreneurship in Kodak for the last 25 years there, even before it was fancy. And when I retired there, I got invited to join NYU Abu Dhabi. As you know, in the Middle East, they are trying to transform from oil economy to knowledge economy, right? So I was asked to join them because the goal there is to, through NYU Abu Dhabi is a strategic long-term investment. It's a multi-billion-dollar investment for Abu Dhabi. So I was asked to join them and start putting together the national ecosystem plan. And I got a major multi-million-dollar grant last year. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And what I do now is build a national ecosystem in Abu Dhabi and the UAE, and also provide some thought leadership in that space. So we'll talk more about it.
Why do you say entrepreneurship is fancy now?
Yeah, I think in the last, we all talk about knowledge economy. I think that's actually a misnomer. It's more about entrepreneurial economies. When people talk about Silicon Valley, it's the first entrepreneurial economy that just came about. I'll tell a little bit more about what knowledge economy is. Now, the reason I think it's more fanciful is because of globalization. The middle class. I'll talk more about what global middle class is, which is about 5.2 billion people in the next 10 to 20 years. Compare that with the American middle class in the last century, which is about 275 million people. So there is no comparison. And the traditional knowledge economy paradigm will not be able to cater to the needs of the 5.2 billion people, because the need is now. And so entrepreneurship at the regional level, ecosystems and all those stuff, is going to kick in, and that's why it's very relevant.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm Sonam Wangchuk from Ladakh. For those of you who don't know, it's the top north of the country, next to Tibet, on the plateau, Tibetan plateau already. I work in the field of education and reforms in education. It so happened that when I was doing my mechanical engineering, to support my education, I had to teach. And when I taught, I saw what was wrong in the education system, especially for people who are outside the mainstreams in the mountains. We used to have a failure rate of 95% in 10th grade qualifying exams. So I got more attracted to work on that rather than purely mechanical engineering. and we did campaigns to bring reforms, and the percentage switched from 5% to 75. Simultaneously, we started a school that was meant for those who still failed, a school where the criteria of admission was that you have failed more than your ranks or marks. At this place, we also promoted engaged hands-on education for these people who didn't learn the way we teach, therefore should be taught the way they learn, and that we found out was to engage them in application of knowledge rather than just chalk, talk and paper, making it hands-on. And we also encouraged at this school, together with young people, to innovate, to solve problems of the place. First innovation was in education reform itself, to bring reforms in the government system, and then we went on to physical innovations like solar heated mud buildings that can stay at plus 15 in minus 20 degrees, and now we are out to make it available to public, government, army and so on, these technologies. Of late we have been working on artificial glaciers to solve the water problems of the mountains, and things like that. Yeah, I think it's natural beauty and the rich culture that binds our people. That one thing I observe is hardly any young Ladakhis who go outside to study New Delhi, Mumbai or New York stay there. They all come back. So there must be something.
So do you have any thoughts on why some of them just remain as ideas or as papers that were published in some journal but completely forgotten?
Yeah, so I think that's a question that will not have an answer. If anybody tells you they know how to do this, they're lying. But the thing is that we have learned a lot. The fact is that there are a lot of heuristics that have come about based on the last 60 years or so in Silicon Valley. That's a fact. And the other interesting thing is it's not for, one of the things that people forget is not just the idea. The idea itself is like around 20% of the problem. Okay, so it's about the team and it's for the people. And I can give you some examples as to why that is the case. It's not for everyone. See, that's the thing. When you say, well, how come the ideas just don't get transformed into final product or in the marketplace, it's because they don't have the right people doing it. It's, I don't know if you know what I mean by whitewater rafting. So it's just the journey. It's a discipline, it's a commitment. You get thrown in the water all the time. You have to get back up on the boat, right? So it's not a hobby, right? It's not like, it's not like, okay, I'll try this and see if it is for me. And most of the times, as you know, in the Silicon Valley, people talk about failure rate of 90%, right? And also the value of death, right? That's what you're talking about. How come things don't get translated? It's all because that, initially, people didn't understand what it took. It's not just the idea. And also you need to have an ecosystem. It's not like, you have an idea and there is no supporting ecosystem there. So most ideas in that type of situation would fail, right? So it's a complicated set of things. But right now, we have learned a lot from the last 60 years or so in Silicon Valley. There are a lot of heuristics that have come about. So, before, especially if you want to talk about the academic environment where there is an idea, people write papers. Part of the problem there is that the professors are too wedded to the idea of the technology itself. While technology is only like 20% of the whole problem, and also professors are not, I'm sorry to say I'm a professor, they are not entrepreneurs in that sense because they have a day job. The day job is to be a professor. They have to make a decision whether they want to do the day job or they want to become an entrepreneur. Unless they make the decision, the idea is going to just stay in the published papers. So that's a great question in the sense that usually the idea was not created by the professor himself or herself. It's the students who work for them. And usually, like you see in Stanford, the students run with the idea. The professor usually stays in as a chief scientific officer or somebody like that. But actually, it's the students who actually are the entrepreneurs. They finish their education, so to speak, and then they start. In many cases, if you look at the statistics, you'll see that if there is a discipline and a commitment and a passion, there's an ecosystem, the success rate goes up. And right now, I heard from Georgia Tech, a good friend of mine, he said that they have a program that called Flashpoint, he says their success rate is around 33%. I don't know. I think it's a very short-term conclusion. But the goal is, I wouldn't be surprised that in ecosystems around the world, and if you're very disciplined, there's a book called Disciplined Entrepreneurship by the MIT professor. If you follow those pathways, I think the success rate can go up significantly. Does it answer your question in a way?
It does. When you're a scientist, or you enjoy doing science, do you think science should be done for the sake of science, and maybe something interesting comes out from there? Because a lot of inventions in the world have come up with someone with a crazy idea who did science for the sake of science, or did something because it was not with an end goal necessarily. So do we need to encourage saying, this is the end goal and you need to find something to solve that?
I think that's a dangerous thing, to do science just for the sake of science. This is one of my worries. I like 30 years ago, I was thinking of how this world is going and should go. I think most of our problems are from doing what we can do. That's like monkey mind. I define it as the difference between cleverness and wisdom. Cleverness is to do whatever you can do, and wisdom is knowing what not to do for long-term good or bad of humanity. So it can be very destructive to just play with things and do whatever you can do. Immature early science development see that, but I see in the evolution of human beings, it's more important to get that wisdom of not touching what is not good for the overall well-being of the planet and of the people. So much of what we see today, I mean, we are so fascinated with technologies like the motor car or the elevator and so on, but we come back to realize that actually the so-called drudgery of a farmer is what keeps him fit with very healthy food. And we could go through all this long route to find out that you use a lift and a car, but then you have to go lift iron to stay fit. They forget that we have over millions of years evolved to use our body physically. You may invent all kinds of things with your monkey mind, but then evolution has it that we have to also expend that energy to keep fit. So what's the point of not lifting your body 2 floors and then going somewhere to lift iron? So that's what I find
providing
clever monkey science.
No, but doesn't that provide employment to the gym owners?
Yeah, so.
But do you believe that? I mean, do you think that there should be some money that is because you come from an academic world?
Yes, that's a good. Let me talk about it.
Yeah.
So actually, to answer your question as to how come science just sometimes stays as science, let's step back a little bit and let's look at the knowledge economy paradigm itself. Let's frame it first, right, so we can understand the context a little bit better. So U.S. obviously is the pioneer in the knowledge economy paradigm, and the person who's this is attributed to is Vannevar Bush. I don't know how many of you know about him. He created the National Science Foundation. He was the president of MIT. He was the secretary to President Roosevelt. He created Raytheon, and he was just an amazing guy. So what he wrote a white paper. It's an amazing paper. If you have a chance, please read it. So what he said is that you have to capitalize your knowledge, right? And so he said that he created 2 buckets. One is knowledge creation. That's the science aspect of it. He said that you have to create a bank of knowledge, and that's done in the universities, he said, right? So that's knowledge creators. And there you can say you can create knowledge for the sake of knowledge creation. That was in the 50s, right? And then he said the second thing is that you have to actually apply that knowledge and transform it into products and services, because the community or the country or the nation that you talk about consists majoritarily in a major way of the middle class. He created the concept of middle class. actually is the backbone of knowledge economy, right? So they need products and services. So he said the company's role is to take the knowledge created in the universities and convert them into technologies, and that give rise to products and services. That's the duality that he created. Very soon in the 60s, what the companies found out is it doesn't really work very well, right? The mindset and the culture and the knowledge creation part is very different from the knowledge conversion part. So the companies like Kodak, GE, AT&T, and others, they actually created their own universities, and they created what's called R&D departments, research and development. The R part of it is actually is a sort of a semi-role as a knowledge creation part, right? And then they have within the company itself the development, they develop the knowledge and create the products and services. That's the way it was set up, right? So, but along this scheme, what was happening was, Fairchild Semiconductors, William Shockley, when he invented the semiconductor transistor, he went to Silicon Valley, created the company, and that led to significant disruptions like VLSI. Then Intel came along, and then obviously Apple and Microsoft. So that created this entrepreneurial climate, which was mainly focused on entrepreneurship and application of ideas and so on. It's very practical. And fortunately, they had two great schools, right? Stanford and Berkeley there. So they were actually feeding the students that. So they created the first entrepreneurial economy, which is California and the Bay Area, right? So there is really, not a real dichotomy. It is just that you need to have, applications. You need to have a pool of knowledge that you can source into. But then in the 21st century, what has happened is that the middle class no longer was localized in the West. It has become global, right? So if you actually look at it, the middle class spending right now, it's based on 2011 statistics, is twice the global middle class spending in Russia, China, India, and Brazil is twice that of the US. And by 2030, it's going to be 6 times that of the US, you see? So that means these people have a lot of needs, right? Somebody has to create products and services for them. So the traditional knowledge economy paradigm is going to be too slow, too stodgy. So you need more and more of the entrepreneurial economies that came out of Silicon Valley. But you don't want to duplicate Silicon Valley because you have to customize it for the various places. I think that's what you're talking about. So there is really no conflict.
Right. How do you encourage people to, market their ideas and become entrepreneurs within that region? Or is there a difference between what?
What we try is finding solutions. Entrepreneurship is about solutions to people's problems, and as you were asking the first question, what clicks and what fails, I think when it really addresses a seriously felt problem, then it clicks more of the time. So what we try to do in Ladakh is make it a part of their education to seek solutions to problems of their context, in our case the mountain context. So helping these young people to apply what they learn. For example, everybody goes through in high school science a chapter on heat, but we end up just memorizing it for exams: conduction, convection, radiation. We applied it to make buildings, just using sun's radiation conducted through the walls and captured in the walls and then radiated in the night with convection cycle of air. So they get to see how it works, and they get to build a house and apply. And then if some of them take it as their entrepreneurship, they become builders. For example, we had a big problem when our solar heated mud buildings were a great success. Like we use no heating at all in -20, -30 throughout the winter. And people would come asking, how do you do that? It's hard to say how you do a building in an hour. So then we found a solution to that by grooming our students to become entrepreneurs in this field, to become the agents that cater it. And that's how they develop the love for it while studying, and then they are happy to pursue it. Another example, if they are studying germ theory in high school science, we try to teach it through engaging them in fruit preservation, make jam, make pickles, and so on. And some of them become so interested that they become entrepreneurs, industrialists who supply So we try to engage young people in the things that they love at school to pursue that at further. And now we are working with an alternative university where, like this school, based on this experience, where our young people are much more capable than just sitting in a classroom for 6 hours listening to somebody and scribbling on a piece of paper. They are by nature has designed them to, through evolution, to be practically physically engaging. At no time before these last 300 years of industrial revolution, human young ones were sitting and learning. They were always engaged, facing challenges, problems, dangers. Even as hunter gatherers, they were in the jungle with their parents. As farmers settled, they were there standing by the side and learning as they did. It's only in the last 300 years that they are sitting 6 hours a day for 15 years of their life. Of course they won't learn, and the energy that nature has packed for the physical engagement then comes out as teenager rage, rebellion, problems, and we are surprised that our children behave like that. In remote rural regions of Ladakh, teenagers are never seen as a problem. They are a part of the society, very respectable, because they are engaged, and evolution is more than these 300 years. So that's what I believe. So engaging them in these and then helping them make some of these into their careers. Definitely we should, and people need to voice their, think and voice, and only then governments will want to change.
Actually, that's a good point that you're saying, and it is getting disrupted. Education is getting disrupted. People are beginning to have discussions at various levels about, is the traditional college education is really necessary, or you just need to have skills. If you really look at it, the education, the traditional education as we know in the West, only caters to a very small pool of people in the world, right? So there are so many, literally, billion people or more do not have access to education at all. Forget about quality of education. So you all know about MOOC, right? I'll give you one example. In Stanford, they offered a course in which they opened it up to, put it on MOOC, right? They opened it up to everybody. 150,000 people took it, right? The top 10% of the class were not Stanford students. They were from outside. Okay, that sort of tells you something. Even if Stanford lived around for like the next 100, 200, 300 years, they would not have, taught 150,000 people. So I come from Kodak, right? Kodak invented the digital camera, and it's now bankrupt, right? So they said, well, it'll never make it because the quality of traditional film per unit cost is so superior. The digital film will never cut the mustard, right? But they were talking to the wrong people, the soccer moms, grandpas and grandmas, right, who love the printed, film. But the people who actually adapted, embraced, and drove the technology for digital are the teenage kids, right? They accepted the poorer quality, but they loved what it could do, right? And now they drove the technology to the point where the quality of the film, of the digital film, is much superior than to the chemical imaging. So the same way, the criticism about MOOC, the education, is that they say the quality is not good, the physical presence of the teacher is not there, but there are so many people in the world who don't have access at all to any type of education. If they embrace this with the new advances in technology like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and so on, they will drive the technology to the point that it will be just fine, right? Actually, it can replace the traditional education, right? So going back to your skill building, I'm a big fan of that actually. Because the middle class is going to be about 5.2 billion people, right? The traditional brick and mortar education is not going to be able to cater to them. What, in the next 200 years? The need is now, right? So if you really, that's why I like the entrepreneurial economies, because the MOOC education is now available, right, to everybody, right? And then in the digital economies, the software, it consists of software and hardware. Software is open source. So it's available. The best software is available. You can teach yourself, right? And the hardware is getting disrupted in Shenzhen, right? And the one thing that the hardware was held by the big companies because, you all know about economy of scale, right? You have to make 1 million of them to get the cost down. But in the digital systems, a digital system consists of like the iPhone consists of 600 parts, right? So the economy of scale is built into the parts. So now a small entrepreneur in a local, in Ladakh or anywhere, they can actually make an iPhone, make a smartphone for 20 bucks, taking the same economy of scale advantage that is competitive with that of the Googles and Apples, because the parts absorb the economy of scale. So they can put together the system. So the hardware is disrupted. Now, in terms of entrepreneurship, all the heuristics that came out of Silicon Valley are now online, right? Lean Launchpad, business model canvas, and so on and on, right? So they can learn. With all these things now democratized, right? So people can actually create local ecosystems, they educate themselves. What's the purpose of education? You have to have a job, you have to feed yourself and be a good citizen, right? So now that becomes available through this change, digital economies. So in a way, I agree with you that the tradition, we had to go away from the education as we know to more vocations and skill building, because the end is actually what matters.
We talked about Apple, getting to scale. But if you're in a region like Ladakh, will those people have access to capital to scale up their ideas? So let's say, assuming 100 people are there, and from the 100, 10 of them are interested in pursuing something that's an entrepreneurial journey. Do you think that in every part of the world, will we also have access in the same way that someone in NYU, Abu Dhabi, or somewhere else will have? And is that a challenge, and how do we actually overcome that challenge?
Yeah, it's a little complex. So what I believe is that in any place, any part of the world, you should not leave the people devoid of the basic necessities. Yeah? So food, clothing, shelter, and good health. That's the basic. After that, it doesn't matter you have 5 times the basic or 100 times, or you are the richest person in the world. The return over investment is hardly anything, yeah, or like you call it law of diminishing returns. Yeah? Your first pair of shoes is what gives you the satisfaction of a lifetime. After that, the 22nd hardly makes any difference. So in a place like Ladakh, what I advocate is that we have to be comfortable. After that, it's more not as much technology of the exterior, but the technology of the interior, of being satisfied and contented and happy. And if you can't be happy, you can be in the middle of New York and be the most stressed and more sad and thinking of suicide, whereas you can be happiest in the mountains of Ladakh. So yes, starting with basic necessities to keep you healthy.
Assuming we all can't move to Ladakh.
No, I'm saying even in Ladakh. So right. I hope you have more means to keep yourself happy. I
can touch upon that actually. I think money is not a problem.
No, not as money. I was just saying that is every part of the world, if they had an idea, let's say I'm in Ladakh, I've found out some fabulous, found some, I don't know, some clothing that will keep me warm, or something that will make the air make me breathe more easily in that sort of altitude. I want to now scale it up, right? I'm an entrepreneur who lives in Ladakh. I love Ladakh, and I've moved there from Hyderabad. But now, will I have the same access to capital? And how would I go and pitch? Do I go to governments to pitch for that? Because there are no venture capitalists sitting out there.
So I don't know how to answer that in a very linear fashion, but I can try to give you an example from, I worked at Kodak, supposedly a rich company, right, in those days, and it's the US, so obviously I had all the infrastructural things, right? But I'll tell you, it's not that simple. Right? I'll give you an example. Maybe you can use that example to see if that answers your question. So as you know, Kodak had its glory days and it was going through the dog days, right? So in the year 2000, right, so we had a new CEO who came and he said, we're going to reinvent Kodak. Right. So he said that the new business is going to be inkjet printing. Right. So the whole research lab was part of the research labs, right? So the whole research labs, the entire group of people suddenly started shifting to inkjet printing. So I took a look at it. This is very important. A lot of people, because of their fears, make choices, to do things that are actually they shouldn't do because they're going to fail. Right? So that's what I'm saying, that if entrepreneurship is not for you, don't do it. So for me, I know myself, if I join the movement, I would just be without a job in a matter of a year or two, because that's not what I do. have you heard of the paradigm that, you have to live on the edge, right? If you don't live on the edge, you're taking up too much real estate, right? So I love to live in the margins, right? That's what I'm comfortable about, right? So I asked myself, what should I do, right? So I said, I'm going to create a new inkjet printer, right? So I said it has to be disruptive, that such a printer does not exist, but it'll be the holy grail. It'll solve all the problems that inkjet printing, regular inkjet printing cannot solve. Sounds absurd, right? So I said, what are the problems? I said, the problem is inkjet printing, people want to print very fast, but you cannot print fast because the water, that when you print fast, you put more water on the paper and you have to dry it. And drying is very slow. Also, it consumes a lot of fossil fuel energy, right? Then the heads clog up, right? So you need to solve that problem. So I came up with a crazy idea that I'm going to create an inkjet printer that will not require any drying. So I said, I'm going to take liquid carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, right? So it's plentiful. So I'm going to harvest it, and I'm going to make an ink in the liquid carbon dioxide. I'm going to print it using that. People laughed at me. Look, when you have a high pressure system, and then when you depressurize it, it's going to expand. It's a fatal flaw, because what do you want in an inkjet printing? That you want to very precise, printing. So it's counterintuitive. So I took that challenge, and I went to, I gave a presentation to my leadership, and they said, well, we'll give you $5,000 and 2 airline tickets, go do some experiments in university and come back, right? So I did that. They said, put a dot in the wall and we'll open the floodgates for money. I did that. But when I came back, they didn't want to give me the money. They said, how much do you want? I said, I want $300,000. They said, that has too many zeros in it, right? So they said, come back in 2 weeks. So I went back in 2 weeks, and I dropped the budget amount to $64,000. They said, come back in 2 weeks. It went on for about 6 months. And actually, my manager was a friend of mine. We came to work together at the same time. But then I realized what he was trying to do is that he was trying to make me very tired of asking him for money, and he thought I would go away. So then I took a look at my situation. I say, look, this is about my job, right? If I do what everybody else is doing, I'm going to be without a job in probably a couple of years. So 2 young kids, family, right? College education is very expensive in the US. So I arranged a meeting with my manager. I took a piece of paper, signed it, put it upside down on his table, and I said, Glenn, I know what you're trying to do, but it's not going to work. This is a letter of my resignation. You can use it, enforce it in 1 year. Give me $64,000 and tell me what you want to deliver, and if I don't deliver, fire me. I had the money in 4 hours. Okay, so
That's the trick.
The thing is that you have to believe in what you want to do. Okay. I was not being reckless, actually. So I think if you don't commit to yourself, regardless of what you do, you're going to fail, right? It's not about the capital. You can find the capital. You don't really need a lot of money. You will find whatever that is necessary to do it. And there are a number of stories like that, The other thing that I would like to share is
walking away, I mean, I've done that many times also.
Yeah.
So in the end, I think it is when you finally say, I'm ready to walk away from this, that you get what you want.
Yeah, you have to be able to walk away.
So if you are willing to walk away from, something that you actually badly want,
yes,
sometimes it works in your favor.
That's a very important point.
Have you ever also encountered that that you wanted something, you go, let's say, to somewhere where you need the resource, whether it's money or something else. Eventually, you are like, you're tired of asking, and finally, you walk away, and suddenly it
I agree with you. You have a sense of detachment that needs to be there. But to finish my story, I started with $64,000 at the risk of losing my job, and in the next year or two, it became the top 10 project in the company. And I had 8 people working for me. I had $2 million in capital expenses, and I have 25 volunteers working, and we wrote 40 patents. So what I'm trying to say is that it is just a commitment that you need to have. I don't know. Do you agree with that? In that
when ideas are good, it's the last problem, money. Even in a remote place like Ladakh, where there are we take advantage of all the interest from the world into Ladakh. So, for example, we are working to promote farm stay tourism among women in the villages, and we do these entrepreneurship confluences every summer, and people from all over India and the world come there for this experience, and they work together with aspiring budding entrepreneurs from Ladakh, and it results in a lot of sharing of experience, knowledge and funding. So yeah, you have to do something to make things come together. There are in the environment just some initiatives to bring them together.